Well, good morning, Grant Memorial. Morning. My name is Cam. I'm one of the pastors here, and we are so happy that you have joined us today as we continue to dig into the very first words of the Bible through our study in Genesis. Now, for those of you who haven't been here for a few weeks, well, you have missed a lot of content already. You haven't missed a lot of scripture because we've actually only covered 4 words so far. And so you can probably catch up in terms of reading at home. But today, we are going to speed our discussion up exponentially in comparison, taking a look at the first 25 verses in one large chunk. And so I invite you to open your copy of the scriptures with me to Genesis chapter 1, where we will read from verse 1 all the way to verse 31 for context. And if you're using the table of contents, just flip one more page and you're probably at Genesis 1. Okay, Genesis 1 starting at verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear," and it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seeds in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give them light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We pray today that we would change as a result of having encountered it. Work in our hearts, that we would leave differently than how we came. Amen. Friends, this is the biblical account of creation. Last week, we discussed the first 4 words in the English scriptures. In the beginning, God. And we concluded from the text that there is an uncreated, pre-existent, eternal, supreme being that was and is and always will be. And what follows that biblical declaration is the account of what this God did in terms of everything that you and I see and experience in the world in which we find ourselves. You see, word number 5 in our text moves from the fact of God to the act of God, namely in creating everything in existence. And so we move from in the beginning God to in the beginning God created. And the next 34 verses, beyond even where we stop today, unpack this for us. And this passage is one, church, that ought to bring us to our knees in worship, in wonder, in awe of a creative and generous God. Right? These verses invite us to look at the magnitude and splendor in our universe, the purpose and function from the telescopic to the microscopic, and realize that it is as it is by the hands of one master designer. This text should, make our worship team run back up on the stage, grab their instruments, and have us sing again, "Great are you, Lord." Right? From the land and seas of this earth that we inhabit, that we see and feel with our own eyes and hands, by the way, that have been intricately designed themselves to see, interpret, touch, and feel, even perform creative acts themselves, to the rest of the cosmos, much of which we only see in our own imaginations or in speculative illustrations in our textbooks. It all has come from him. This text invites us to acknowledge how powerful the uncreated one is, who commands the heavens and the earth by the simple utterance of his word. And this text leaves no category unturned. If you are an animal lover, animals are God's idea. If you love to be out on the water, water is a God original. If you marvel at the stars have all been made and named individually by God himself. If you love to eat food, can I get an amen? From fruit from trees and bushes or carbs from grains, thank the one who filled the earth with vegetation, right? At one point, I was actually considering, I don't know if this was the laziness in me or if I thought that this would, better prepare us for what we're reading, but I was considering just simply this morning putting on an episode of BBC's Planet Earth for us to watch and letting us marvel at the intricacies of nature so as to enhance our honor of the one who did it all. Friends, nothing should draw us into worship more than this passage of Scripture, which presents a categorical inventory of God's creative action. Unfortunately, rather than lead us into worship, this very text often leads us into significant debate instead. Argument, belittling, and arrogance resulting in disunity within the church. You see, what should unify us as we all worship in the same direction, the same Creator God, often serves to divide us over questions of detail, how, when, or how long in particular. With some judging the legitimacy of others' salvation or their commitment to the Scriptures based on their agreement on these details. Church, it is a tragedy that this text that screams of God's glory, that invites us to together bow down in humble adoration, should become the mallet with which we beat each other over the head. And Grant Memorial, we are not immune from this. In the lead up to this series in Genesis, I don't recall one person telling me that they were excited to walk through Genesis to enhance their wonder and marvel of God. But I did hear from countless people about what I should emphasize in terms of the age of the earth and the interplay between science and the biblical record. Church, do you think that maybe we're missing the point here? Now, to be sure, this text does teach us much about the details of creation, some much more certain than others, and we will get to that. But it's important as we begin to be humbled by the God who is above it all, before we are tempted to puff ourselves up in terms of our own opinions and understanding. Right? This text points to an infinite God with an infinite mind, and we would do well to remember the limits of our own minds in comparison. And so with that said, what is all the fuss about? What is it that leads Christians into debate rather than worship in Genesis 1? Well, as I hinted at before, the devil is in the details. Now, I know that's just an expression, but perhaps there's something to be said about the enemy's desire to keep us fixated on details so as to keep us away from simple worship of our God. But the primary detail that leads Christians into debate, and we're talking Christians, I'm not talking about the general debate with everyone, I'm saying amongst the church, the primary detail that leads us to debate and challenge one another is in regards to the age of the earth. Right? It's the age of the earth question. And while modern scientific discovery in the past couple centuries has certainly contributed to the discussion and perhaps accelerated it, these are questions that have been around in the church since at least the 3rd century, and within the Hebrew faith since much before that. So these are not new conversations. And the question here is, how are we to interpret the days of creation? Right? How are we to interpret the days of creation? When Genesis 1 talks about 6 days of creation, what does it mean? Does it mean 6 literal, successive 24-hour periods, leaving the universe to be no more than generously 10,000 years old or so? Or does the text here present something different than 6 literal successive solar days, making allowance for the universe to be older than 10,000 years? And what has emerged over the past 2 millennia, again, this is not a new conversation, in response to this question are at least 6 different understandings regarding the timeline of the creation narrative that I would consider to be within the bounds of Christian orthodoxy. Now, the fact that some people's backs just went up a little bit shows us just how big of a deal that we have made this. I haven't said anything yet, but the mere mention of competing views shows us how much some of us have riding on this. So what I'm going to do is present these 6 views of this text that, again, I would consider to be within the bounds of biblical orthodoxy that are held to by Bible-believing, Jesus-following evangelicals. Now, understand that there are more than 6 views of what Genesis 1 means, right? There are many more than what we're going to talk about today, but in my opinion, most of those views, I believe that the biblical text does not allow for. And so we're going to stick with these 6, and I'm not really going to comment on them other than just explain what they are to provide us some context. And so the first view, or way to interpret Genesis 1, is the 24-hour solar day view. The 24-hour solar day view. And so this is the literalistic interpretation of the text. And so the word day means a 24-hour solar day. And these solar days took place in succession, meaning that all of creation was completed within a time span of 144 hours. Second view is called the punctuated activity view. This view is that creation was performed within 6 literal 24-hour solar days, But these days themselves were not necessarily in succession and could have been separated by indefinite periods of time. The next view is called the gap view, which argues that there is a gap in the text between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. So Genesis 1:1, God creates everything, the heavens and the earth, and this includes the spiritual world, etc. And there's an indefinite time frame before we get to Genesis 1 verse 2. Now, this is typically presented to make allowance for a primeval rebellion of angelic proportions in which demons walk away from God and establish a kingdom opposed to his. And in this view, the Genesis 1:2 picks up with God recreating the earth and inhabiting it with humans and the like. The next view is called the historical creationism view. And this view also presents a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, suggesting that there are essentially two different accounts here. So Genesis 1:1 is the account of God creating everything, the heavens and the earth, while the account of Genesis 1:2 and onward is the ordering of what he has made, or the preparing the land, specifically the ancient Near East, for his creation of humans to live and thrive where God places them. And in between these two narratives, there is an unspecified amount of time. Next, we have the day-age view. And this view leans on the Hebrew term yom, used here for day, and points out that this word throughout scriptures is used in different contexts, sometimes meaning a solar day, and sometimes meaning a period of time or an age. And so with this argument, this view suggests that the days in Genesis 1 are ages or time frames in which God creates everything, not necessarily 24-hour solar days. And finally, the sixth view is the analogical day view. And this view suggests that the word day is used to present an analogy that humans will understand for God's work days. Right? So God did create in 6 days as we understand them, but the days are simply analogous to our work days, but are not exactly the same. Since God lives outside of time, right? God created in 6 of his days, which are not quite the same as our days. Now, I know that is a quick and very simplistic overview of those views. And I know there are some people who are already like, oh man, I got reasons, and there's other of us who go, what did we just do? Don't ever do that again. But what I want to say is that if you were thinking, if your back was kind of getting up and you're looking, going, I don't think that's true, and you're kind of looking through stuff, friends, I do that too. Okay, can I just say that? I have my own convictions, my own opinions about this text. But the goal here is simply to say that there are differing opinions that if we're willing to be theologically humble, can all be reconciled with the biblical text. Okay, can I say that again? There are different views here that if we are theologically humble, can all be reconciled with the biblical text. Now, admittedly, some of these views require more theological gymnastics than others, but these views have all been held by scripture-loving men and women who have given their lives to the study of God's word and who we would absolutely extend the hand of fellowship to, and in fact do on a regular basis. And really what I want us to know, what I want us to come away from this with, is that there is room here, church. There is room here at Grant Memorial for people who differ on some of these creation details. For people who find themselves in these different camps that we've talked about. Now, before we move on, I'm going to lay all my cards on the table. And I'll tell you that I have personally always leaned towards a literal 6-day view of the text. Right? I have no trouble reading the text simply and literally. I have no personal issue reconciling the text with science, but I believe that God can do anything he wants. He has the capacity to create things as they are, even fully aged in an instant, let alone 6 days. And so I don't really feel the need to complicate things so much. However, This is an area in biblical interpretation that I know calls for extreme theological humility, because when it comes down to it, I am not an earth scientist. I am not fluent in ancient Hebrew, nor was I actually there in the beginning to speak with much authority experientially about exactly how God went about the process of creation. And so while I have my convictions, which I believe are true, as anyone with convictions does, I concede that I may be wrong. And this is not the hill upon which I will die. Nor do I believe that one's view of the creation days is the litmus test for biblical orthodoxy or biblical faithfulness. St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Charles Hodge, B.B. Warfield, Francis Schaeffer, Charles Spurgeon, C.S. Lewis, James Montgomery Boyce, Michael Horton, R.C. Sproul, Timothy Keller, D.A. Carson, John Piper, William Lane Craig. These are just a few of the names from whom my interpretation of this text differs. And I'm not willing to suggest that they are somehow abiblical, biblically ignorant, or that their faith is somehow lesser because of it. And I don't see why I can't worship the Creator as this text invites me to do alongside any of them, aside from the fact that a couple of them have passed on. Friends, my hope is that this text unifies God's people around the main things, rather than dividing us on the things that, if we're honest, aren't as plain or aren't as essential as we maybe think they are. Right? As we know, church, this is not a salvation issue. Romans 10:9 says, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And friends, verse 10 does not continue, oh yeah, and you must believe the right way regarding the days of creation. Right? It's just not there. And so, church, let us be humble. Let us be unified, knowing that in the end, we will come to know as God knows. One day, the truth of all the details will be fully revealed. And until then, when one camp can turn to the other and say, I told you so, which no one actually will do in the presence of God, let us keep our eyes fixed on the non-negotiables, of which there are some in this very text, and of which we're going to spend the rest of our time together focused on. Last week, while we were in Ontario for our Baptist General Conference denominational meetings, Steve and Karen Bach found themselves on the Niagara Sky Wheel, a 175-foot Ferris wheel overlooking Niagara Falls. Now, what I came to find out later is that Steve and Karen's gondola that they were sitting in had a technical malfunction. I'm leaving space for concerned speculation before I reveal to you that the malfunction was not a safety issue, but rather had to do with the elevator music that was supposed to be playing in the gondola. You see, while the rest of the riders, Bethany and myself included, enjoyed smooth jazz in our gondolas as we rotated up and around, Steve and Karen did not. I can sense the collective gasps in the room. Now, while they were rotating, I'm told, Steve, who knew that music was supposed to be playing, fiddled with some switches. He pushed mute buttons on and off to no avail before eventually giving up hope for the soothing saxophone melodies and turned his attention to just enjoying the view that the Skywheel offered. Now, let's say that he hadn't. Let's say Steve had so set his mind to figuring out the music problem that he didn't once let himself enjoy the view. Right? We would call that a waste. He would have missed the point. The whole reason that he was on the Skywheel in the first place was to take in the views, not to listen to elevator music. It's what the Skywheel was built for. The views are the reason that it exists. The views are the main attraction. Well, friends, in the same way, we must remind ourselves that there is a reason that this text before us today was written. There's a purpose for this passage. And it's important that we don't become so fixated on detail questions that we miss what we must get out of Genesis 1, right? That we don't get lost with what we can get out of Genesis 1, that we miss what we have to get out of Genesis 1:1, what Genesis 1:1 was written for. And church, hear this. The point of Genesis 1 is not so much the how of creation as it is the who of creation. Right? Genesis 1 is not so much the how of creation as it is the who of creation. This text should lead us, as we said before, to focus on and marvel at God and not argue with one another. That's the point. Now, this doesn't mean that we ignore the other details. I'm not saying that. Or that we don't care, we don't hold opinions, we don't explore deeply every word in this passage. Friends, we should. Right? Our desire should be to know God more at every opportunity, to dig into his word and understand at every opportunity. But there are some things that we can, within Christian orthodoxy, hold on to graciously with open hands. But as I mentioned before, there are some non-negotiables in this text. Some things that the text exists to do that we must leave with, that a biblical worldview demands, and that are infinitely more important than some of the other details. And so we're going to focus on 5 non-negotiables of Genesis 1. 5 things that should unify us, no matter if we believe that creation was done in 144 hours or if God took his time. And it is faithfulness in these areas, at these points, that allow for us to stay within biblical orthodoxy no matter where we happen to land on the earth age question. And so the first essential in this text is that God created everything. God created everything. Church, this is the primary point of Genesis 1. This is the view from the top of the sky wheel. This is the ultimate intention of this text, that everything in existence, aside from God himself, has been created by God himself. Right? As I said, in this text, the who of creation is the most important part. And it doesn't take very long to notice this when we look at the text. For those of you who have a Bible open on your laps, look down at it for a second. Upon a quick glance, what word do you notice appearing more than anything else?
It's God.
God, right? You got it, Millie. Right? It's God. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and circle all the times that God appears in your Bible in this passage. And when you're done, if you get them all, you will find that God appears anywhere between 30 and 35 times in the creation account, depending on your translation. Friends, God is the main character. God is the hero. He is the point of this passage. As I said earlier, the who is infinitely more important than the how in this creation text and for the biblical worldview that Genesis sets out to establish. Further, the narrative pattern of things in Genesis makes this extremely clear as well. Right? Not only is God the primary subject, but the narrative pattern forces us to come to this conclusion. You see, with minor variations, the creative pattern that we see in Genesis 1 is that God speaks, verse 3, 6, 9, 14, 20, 24, 26, 29, and that what he speaks comes into existence, verse 4, 7, 9, 11, 15, 21, 24, 27, and 30. God speaks and it happens. That's the structure of this creation text. Church, there is no other force at work here, right? Whatever it is that you see in the cosmos, the biblical pronouncement is that God did that. The land and the seas, the skies and the constellations, every living creature and the food that sustains them was spoken into existence by God. It was his idea, and it was his will that made it happen. This is one non-negotiable, church. Nothing came to be on its own. God is the one who is responsible for everything in creation. This is clear in the text. The second non-negotiable is that God created out of nothing. God created out of nothing. Let me ask you, when you use the term homemade, what do you mean? Right, if you say, we're having homemade pizza tonight, how many of you just simply mean you didn't order it from a pizza place? Right, you dumped a can of sauce on a pre-made crust, sprinkled some pre-shredded cheese before you threw it in the oven, and voila, homemade, right? Or does homemade in your home mean something different? Right? Does something need to be made from scratch in order to be considered homemade? Some purists in the room are nodding their heads. Does the dough need to be kneaded by hand? Do the tomatoes need to be personally crushed and spiced for sauce? Must all the vegetable toppings be from your own garden? Do you need to have personally raised the pigs for pepperoni? What are the standards for homemade? And can anyone ever really, truly make something from scratch? Well, there's a Latin term that the church has used for centuries to describe God's creative work that basically means from scratch, only it goes further than even the strictest definitions of homemade. And that Latin term is ex nihilo, which literally means out of nothing. Right? Ex nihilo, out of nothing. Right? And this isn't simply out of the garden or out of the fields. It is out of nothing. It means that neither what God made nor the components that make up what God made were in existence prior to him creating them. He himself created the elements out of which everything else was made. And the reason that this is a non-negotiable is that Genesis 1:1 is clear that nothing pre-existed God. Right? There were no raw materials that God could have used that he didn't make. And the verbiage in this text that we read this morning ensures that this is well understood. You see, there are two main verbs in Hebrew translated as create. One is called asa and the other is bara. Now, asa means to create or make something out of something else that already exists. So, for example, to make a cabin, something that doesn't exist yet, out of trees, something that already existed would be asa creation. Right? It's the same thing as making art out of paint and canvas, or a car out of metals and plastics. You could come up with thousands of examples because we, as humans, asa all the time. And throughout the scriptures, we see both God and humans creating in this way. Now, the other word used to denote creation in the scriptures is the word bara. And bara means to make something out of what has never been before. Right? Making something completely from scratch, as in from nothing, or ex nihilo. And friends, according to the scriptures, only God can bara. Nowhere in the scriptures do we see humans bara. Humans always start with what God has provided. God, however, brings things out of nothing, and it is bara creation that we read about in Genesis 1:1. As Hebrews 11:3 says, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Right? And so we must know, church, that God didn't create using elements that had pre-existed him. He didn't simply just slap ingredients together. Rather, he himself conceived of both ingredients and final product and made them come into being. The third point that we must take out of this text is that God created intentionally. God created intentionally. Just as we discussed 2 weeks ago, the universe is rife with purpose. Right? There are marks of a designer all over creation, which means that God created, he designed intentionally. Right? What we see in existence is not accidental or by chance. Neither did God simply start a process, walk away, and surprise himself with what resulted. Right? Our text shows God speaking intentionally into each and every element of creation. Friends, take note of this. God created everything. Right? An evolutionary worldview, even a theistic evolutionary view that says God simply threw the first pitch, is categorically not a biblical view of the text. The birds didn't come about by themselves or from the previous form before them. They came about because God willed them to come about and made them, verse 21. Day and night did not organize themselves. God organized all the things the way he willed them, verse 5, verse 16. It was by God's intentional and present hand that the earth was formed and the earth was filled. We see this right off the top in Genesis 1:2. It says, now the earth was formless and empty. This is the canvas. And then those words are followed up in verse 3 with, and God said, or then God said. Right? God's earthly act of creation intentionally brought chaos into order. Right? Not chaos in the sense that God wasn't in control of it, but chaos in the sense that it hadn't yet been given form, purpose, or meaning. So God spoke into the chaos, into the void, into that which was not yet, that which was formless and empty, as the text says. And what we see for the next 34 verses is God providing form and fullness. Let's take a look at how this happens. So we start off in Genesis 1:2 with the earth being formless and empty, right? Those are the two categories that God speaks into. And on days 1 to 3, God provides form to the earth, form to that which was formless. So on day 1, he provides form through creating and separating light from dark. On day 2, he separates the waters from the sky. And on day 3, he creates land and separates land and vegetation from the seas, right? So we go from unformed to form. So in these 3 days, right, form is given to the earth. But it's still empty, which God addresses on days 4 to 6 as he fills the earth that he has formed. On day 4, God creates the luminaries to govern the day and night, sun, moon, and stars. On day 5, God creates birds and fish to fill the waters in the sky. And on day 6, God creates animals and humans to fill the land and eat the plants. Now, I helped you a little bit with the color coding, but do you see the connection and correlation here? Right? Do you see that? God separates, the form is light from dark, and then on day 4, he fills that. Right? Day 2, water and sky are conceived and created, and on day 5, he fills the water and the sky. On day 3, he creates land, and on day 6, he fills the land. Right? Days 1 to 3 are about forming the earth. Days 4 to 6 are about filling it, ultimately moving from chaos into order. And of course, as we will get to in the next few weeks, on day 7, God rests from this creation process of forming and filling the earth. But all of this entire account, does not allow us to suggest that God was random or reckless in his creation or absent in the process, but that he was present, carefully, intentionally creating conditions for life to exist, form, before personally filling the earth with that life for his own glory and for the good of those he created. Which leads us into another certainty we learn from Genesis 1. God's creation is good. God's creation is good. A part of the creation pattern in the text is God's own personal evaluation of his work. Remember, we looked at the pattern. God speaks, it happens, and then we see evaluation come after that. And in verse 4, 10, 12, 18, 21, and 25, God evaluates what he has made along the way, declaring what he's made to be good. And then in verse 31, at the end of day 6, we read his final remarks. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Friends, when God, the one who gives definition to goodness itself, declares that something is good, it is. That's something that we must take from the creation narrative, that no matter what it feels like to us on any given day, God's creation is itself good. As we will explore as we go throughout our study in Genesis, we will explore why things don't seem so good today, right? We're going to get there. But one thing we must know is that there was nothing deficient in God's original creation. There was no sin. And prior to the fall of man, which we will encounter in chapter 3, everything was good. In fact, a deeper look at the literary devices used in this text show that the author takes it a step further, ensuring that the original audience understood creation not just to be good, but to be absolutely perfect. You see, since we read an English translation of the text, there are some things that we miss from a literary standpoint. And one of the literary devices used in this text is numerology. You see, in the Bible, the number 7 represents perfection or completion. And so whenever we see 7s in Scripture, there's often more going on than simply the account of a number. There's typically something being said about fullness, completion, or perfection. And when we look at this text in its original form, it is oozing with 7s and multiples of 7. Not only are there 7 days of creation, that's the easy one, but in the first verse, there are 7 words made up by 28 letters, 7 times 4, perfectly split into 2 14-letter phrases, 7 times 2. In the second verse, there are 14 words, 7 times 2. In the 7th paragraph about the 7th day, there are 3 sentences made up each of 7 words, 21 in total, 7 times 3, broken up so that the middle phrase is the middle word is the word 7. The word Elohim, for God, appears 35 times in the creation narrative, 7 times 5. Earth appears 21 times, 7 times 3. Heaven appears 21 times, 7 times 3. The pronouncement, it is good, appears 7 times. In fact, the total Hebrew word count of the narrative proper from Genesis 1:1 to 2 verse 3 is 469, which is 7 times 67. And while I could go on, I think I will stop, but some commentators have pointed out up to 30 separate codes involving the number 7 in just the first verse alone. Now, I'm no numerologist or great mathematician. However, it seems clear that something is going on in the text. The author, Moses, or God, who directed its writing, is not only telling us the history of what happened, but the words have been chosen intentionally in such a way that the original hearers couldn't have missed another point being made, that the creation was perfect and complete, not lacking in anything. Friends, this is the signature of God on this text. Harvard professors, not liking this numerology and symmetry thing, set out to make it not a big deal. And they set out to come up with some linguistic symmetry of their own. And using computers with access to over 400,000 words in the English language, they couldn't come up with even one sentence about any topic that had anywhere near the mathematical symmetry of this particular passage of Scripture that was written in biblical Hebrew, limited to only 4,500 words. Now take what you will from that. But if you were to ask the question of this text, how did God make the universe? The text emphatically screams, perfectly. The final non-negotiable in the creation text is what we are going to talk about next week. Now, for those who struggle in this way and can't have your list of 5 remain incomplete until next week, here it is so you can sleep at night. Number 5, a preview. God created humans uniquely. God created humans uniquely. Like I said, this is what we'll be unpacking next week, and so I am going to wrap up without further comment on that. But a worldview summary. Remember, we're looking at worldview. How does Genesis set us up to see the world, to live in the world? And so a worldview summary of this Genesis 1 text that we must understand is that we believe that God intentionally created everything out of nothing, and his creation was good. Right? We believe that God intentionally created everything out of nothing, and his creation was good. Now, I want to end our discussion this morning the same way that we started it, by reminding us that Genesis 1 is best utilized as a worship text. Right? Genesis 1 is not primarily a scientific text, it is a worship text. It forces us to look at every created thing and acknowledge there is one God who is above it all, who is responsible for all beauty, for all intricacy, for all of the things that blow our minds, the things that we think we understand, and the things that we know we don't. And friends, while I understand that we could spend 3 months in this chapter 1 alone, there's so much more we could unpack. There's so much that we're leaving behind. There is so much that we have missed. But my prayer is that we don't miss and haven't missed the one thing that we cannot afford to: marveling at the majesty of our Creator God. In just a moment, we're going to move into praise. And I hope that as we sing about God and his creation, that you will, as the text did, picture all that you have seen and know, and thank God that it all comes from him, the one in the business of bringing order out of chaos, both in the beginning and even today. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, it's hard to know how to even approach you after reading a text like this that declares how big and wonderful and holy you are. And so, God, first of all, we thank you that you have given us access to yourself. God, help us to be people who marvel at you. Help us to be people who humble ourselves in your presence, humble ourselves in the presence of others as we attempt to know you and your word better. And may our eyes remain fixed on you, our Creator. Amen.
Thank you, Cam.